Alright guys, Drone Geek here. I'm gonna make a video on the settings that I typically use most of the time for still photos and for video as well. I don't ever use auto. I don't think I ever have, not once. With auto, it may work, but the problem is when you're turning the drone and the lighting changes, just the environment changes. The camera is going to keep automatically changing its settings. And the problem with that is then you end up with all this mishmash of video or photos, and then they don't all match. And then they get them to match in post-processing in Premiere Pro or whatever you're using. I use Premiere Pro. It just makes so much more work trying to get them to match. And I pretty much, when I set the settings, I won't really touch them until I land back down and go for another flight again. That way I know all my footage is going to be the same across the board. Just makes things so much easier. There we go. We're a little dark. See if we can get a little picture on it anyways. There we go. We got some picture. The first thing first is if you got the red shutter button there, that means you're in video. If it's white, it means you're in still photos. You can also see there's a little photo icon and like a camera icon above it. It's super easy to tell if you're in manual because the settings, which is the icon directly below, there will be an M on it. See, if you're on auto, there won't be an M there. Manual, there's an M there right below the shutter button. The first thing first is if you got the red shutter button there, that means you're in video. If it's white, it means you're in still photos. You can also see there's a little photo icon and like a camera icon above it. It's super easy to tell if you're in manual because the settings, which is the icon directly below, there will be an M on it. See, if you're on auto, there won't be an M there. Manual, there's an M there right below the shutter button. You got your ISO. You always want to stay as closest to 100 as possible. If it starts getting really dark, you may have to start bumping that up, but the problem is you're going to get more noise, more grain into your image. First thing I like to turn on is the histogram, and this gives you the little graph here that I'm moving around, and if it's like a big mountain and it's all smashed to the left or smashed to the right, then your exposure's not right. If it's all to the left, your image is too dark. Now if it's all blown out to the right, your image is too bright. And as you can see now, we're pretty much all on the left side, and well, it's pretty obvious. Almost the whole image is pretty dark where it's at. So that's just something that's very convenient to see. You may think you don't need it, but when you're out in the sunlight, sometimes it can be hard to actually tell by looking at the screen what your exposure's at. So that pretty much just guarantees that you're all right. The front LEDs auto turn off. That I turn on. That way, when you're taking a picture or recording video at night, the red LEDs in front here, they will shut off when it's recording or when you hit the shutter button, because otherwise the red hue can get in your pictures. So I typically have that on. Overexposure warning I leave off. Noise reduction usually off. The grids can be nice. The rule of thirds comes into play here. You can put the grid lines on the screen and the diagonals as well. I don't really like the diagonals, but I do just like the grid like that. Then you can kind of proportion where you want your subject to be on the screen. It just makes it so much easier to do. You don't have to really think about it as much when you're flying. The center point, you can actually put a center point in the middle of your screen. As you can see, a circle. I don't use that. I mean, that's a personal preference. Anti-flicker depends on your electricity and your country. Doesn't even let me change it. File index mode. This I put on continuous. By default, it's going to be on reset. And what that does is every time, let's say you take 100 pictures, 1 to 100, and then you delete all them pictures, and then you start over again. It doesn't start from 1. It'll start at 101. It'll just keep counting and counting and counting So after you delete them all and you start again, it's going to continue from the last number it left off at. That way you just don't have issues with overwriting files and things like that. Format SD card, that's down in the bottom. Reset settings. Then we got the photo tab here. That, you got single shot, HDR, multiple. I think the AEB is like brackets. I've never used it actually. And then the time shot. So you can put it up in here and say, hey, take a picture every 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I don't even think I've used that actually. I pretty much just use single shot. I've used HDR shot a few times, but it's almost always single shot. It just takes one photo and that's it. 4:3 is your typical aspect ratio default. I just leave it like that. Image format, I like to shoot in JPEG plus RAW. All these settings are reset because it did a firmware update not long ago, and I haven't changed them. RAW is always nice because that pretty much gives you the full image to play around and do whatever you want with afterwards. In like Lightroom, Photoshop, or any of the other various programs out there. But I typically do JPEG plus RAW because like your tablet or your phone typically can't open a RAW image unless you have some certain software on there. And by having a JPEG as well, I can immediately share it to Facebook or Instagram or send it to somebody in a message or whatever instantly. Others I wouldn't be able to. And then when I import it into Lightroom, Lightroom is smart enough to say it ignores the JPEGs and it only imports the RAW images. And once they're imported, I go and erase them all from the card. That way I have both because you got things like Snapseed and Lightroom Mobile and things on your devices that can read the JPEGs. You can just do some quick edits and be on your way. Now if you just did RAW, you wouldn't be able to do anything on your phone. White balance. That I never shoot on auto because once again the auto, it's going to change as you're rotating a drone, as the sun's in different angles. That white balance could be changing on you, and then your footage doesn't balance out when you're all done. You got to try to match it all together. So I typically do sunny, which is usually pretty accurate, or cloudy depending on the day. And sometimes I'll do custom. A lot of times I'm around 5700K, I know seems to look pretty well. I use that a lot. And then it won't change. It'll be locked into that the whole time until you change it. Fluorescent, incandescent, I've never used. Style, I typically just leave that on none. I think the image looks just fine. Some may say it's too sharp. You can go down to custom. You got your sharpness, and you can actually bring that down -3. Brightness, contrast. I typically just leave it on standard. I think it looks fine as is. Again, it's a personal preference. You can always change that in post-production as well. D-Log is typically what I shoot in, or D-Cine-alike. Normal is pretty much just take video and post as is. All these other things I never use. There's Vivid. That looks so fake and unnatural to me. I don't really like it. D-Log. The thing with D-Log is when you first pull your footage or your pictures off of your device and your computer, they're gonna look almost like they're black and white. Not quite, but they're gonna look so flat, like there's nothing there. That's because it's the D-Log. The information's there. It's kind of like a raw photo somewhat. It's there. You just have to do some editing to pull it out and bring it out, because it's just like hidden in there behind the scenes, I guess you could say. And the Cine-alike is somewhat like that, but not as much, so it does have still a decent amount of color. So sometimes I've used that in the past, but typically it's D-Log. Gives you a really flat image, and then when you're in your photo editing or video editing software, you can adjust all the colors and bring the colors out and make them pop. Sometimes some of these, even normal at times, it can overexpose things, underexpose things, and then it just washes out all the whites, just crushes the blacks, and once they're gone, you can't get them back. So that's with D-Log. Everything is at a neutral point, and you can bring it down, you can bring it up, and it still looks great. It just works the best, but it takes more work. Shutter speed here. For photos, it doesn't really matter. Pretty much whatever gets you your exposure that you're looking for. It's so hard to tell on these devices. Sometimes they look super dark, and then you get them on the computer, and it's like, oh no, that's not dark. That's what that histogram is so nice to have. And then when you switch over to video mode, and you go in there, it's pretty much the same thing. It only goes down to the 1/30th though for the shutter speed. It doesn't go as low. And as you go higher, it's going to get darker. And typically, for best results, you're going to want to put your shutter speed when you're doing video at double your frame rate. So if you're recording at 30 FPS, you're going to shoot for 60. If you're shooting at 24 FPS, the double that would be 48, which obviously you can't do with here. You just do 50, which is the next closest thing. You'd never really tell the difference. But that just keeps your footage looking the nicest, and that's where ND filters come into play that you screw on, which I have a few of those. I don't think they're out for the Inspire 2 yet, but I definitely will need those. Alright, you go into your video settings here. You got your video size. I typically shoot in 3840 2160, which is 4K as most people would say. It's technically the 4096 2160. But I don't like, you end up with the little black bars, and I hate them things. I can't stand them. The cinematic bars, they don't do it for me. I always do 4K shooting. The only reason I would see 1080 being useful is if you need like the 120 FPS for slow motion. You could slow that footage way down. Other than that, I believe in shooting the best quality, and then you can always render at a lower quality later on. But you can't increase the size without it looking like crap. So I always try to stay as high as I can, and if I need to go lower, then I redo it and make it lower after the fact. MP4. Typically that's what you're going to do on a Windows machine. MOV files, that's pretty much a Mac thing. I'm a Windows guy. NTSC, that's here in the US. PAL, I think, is just about everywhere else. I could be wrong, but most of the world's going to be PAL. Again, Whitebalance, auto, don't use it. It'll keep changing on you. You either do sunny if it's a sunny day, cloudy if it's a cloudy day, and custom, sometimes it can get a real fine tune, but for me it seems to usually be around 5700K to 6000K. Seems to be pretty good, and that can always be corrected. If you're raw images, you can completely change the white balance. Doesn't hurt the image at all. And on videos in Premiere, you can actually adjust white balance as well. It's a little more complicated, but you can. Style, same thing, standard, landscape, soft, custom. I pretty much just leave it on flat zeros, the standard. Some may actually bump like the sharpness down. I think the sharpness is good where it's at. I like sharpness in my image. I just think it looks more clear and crisp. So I just leave it at 0. You can always add sharpness in post-production too. So that's why I leave it at 0. Again, color's pretty much the same thing. I pretty much use Decinelike or D-Log, depending on how much effort I feel like putting into it in color grading. Cinelike doesn't require as much. D-Log requires quite a bit because it's such a flat image. There's barely any color in it at all. You just need to bring it all out. It's there. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much covers the video and picture settings on the Phantom 4. The Phantom 4 Pro is going to have more than this. I think the Mavic is going to be pretty similar to the original Phantom because that camera is more on par with this. The Phantom 4 Pro takes a step up, so it's got some more settings, and the Inspire 2 obviously as well. I have the X4S for my Inspire, and there's definitely more settings in there, but we can cover that in another video. Thanks for watching. But I pretty much always... Hey, look at that. It rebooted. never crashes. It's gotta be the screen recording I got going on. It's usually pretty stable. Unlike my experience with Android with this.
Card error. Please replace it.
We have an SD card error. I didn't even know there was one in there. Yeah, it says invalid. I don't think there is a card in it. I took it out.